Okay, well, I think we'll get started and I'll introduce myself and then introduce Alex. So I'm Linda Herr, and along with my husband, James Wheeler, we are area directors for Mennonite Central Committee in Europe and the Middle East. And I often think about, as we work in the Middle East, we are working with a wide variety of churches, but none of them are Mennonite. Because Mennonite mission organizations and MCC have said, you know, the church in the Middle East is already splintered. Let's build up what is there. Let us find people who are like-minded so that we can work together. But it also means there's no direct connection to Mennonite World Conference. And we wanted to make a connection with Alex Awad, who has met with Mennonite groups before in US and Canada, and has spoken about his life and his evangelical faith. And so it is in that, for that reason, that we've invited him to come and meet with you all, with us all this evening, morning, wherever we are. Alex has, let me see if I have all your denominations lined up. You worked as a United Methodist missions for 20 years in a Baptist church. Was that how that goes? But finds yourself resonating with Mennonites in many levels. And so we're happy to welcome you here to this space to tell us about your faith and you and your family's history. So, and to introduce yourself further, because you'll be speaking about your own personal life too. So thank you, Alex.
Yes, thank you, Linda, and greetings everyone. In Arabic, we say Assalamu alaikum, which means peace be to you. And this is a very familiar greeting in the Middle East and throughout North Africa, and really in many parts of the world. Peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum. As Linda said, I was born in Jerusalem, and I lived there most of my childhood. But I had a lot of connections with Mennonites and with MCC volunteers who came to the Holy Land to serve in Jerusalem, in Bethlehem, and in much of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. I also was a member of the Mennonite Advisory Committee in Jerusalem. And also, as Linda said, I did a lot of itineration in Mennonite churches in Canada and in the United States. And I love the Mennonite people and their hospitality and their commitment to Christ. At this time, I want to share my screen, and I will tell you a little bit about my life. Let me see, I read this correct. Okay. Okay. I'll do it again. Okay, let me see here. Share screen. Okay. Do you see my screen okay? Is it showing? Yeah, okay, good.
There, now it's perfect, good. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, we'll start with this slide. This is Jerusalem, where I was born. My family and I, we are Palestinians, we are Christians, we are Arabs. That's who we are. And we've been living in Jerusalem for many, many centuries. So this is a picture of Jerusalem from Mount Olives. This is called the Teardrop Church. Christians believe that Jesus, as he came from Jerusalem to Mount Olives, halfway on the way, he looked back at the city and he wept over the city. And so Christians built this church to remember the time when Jesus wept over the city of Jerusalem. So I took this picture myself, and if you look through the picture, you see the Dome of the Rock, you see the Lutheran Church right here, and you see other places in Jerusalem. But this is my city. This is where I was born. My neighborhood is in a side of Jerusalem called Musrara. And if you see the red circle, or this thing, this is where my family lived until 1948. And then in 1948, we became refugees, and we have to evict our neighborhood. And my father was killed in the first Arab-Israeli war in 1948, leaving my mother with 7 children. And so life was very, very tough for us. But this picture was taken from Damascus Gate. If you are familiar with Jerusalem, this is only about 7 to 10 minutes walk from Damascus Gate to my neighborhood, which is called Musrara. These are my grandparents. The lady on the right, her name is Nazira. She's my grandmother, and this is her husband, Musa, and other members of the family. What do we know about these people? They are Palestinians because they lived in Palestine. They are Christians belonging to the Greek Orthodox Church because Christians existed in Palestine since the day of Pentecost. And they are Arabs because they speak the Arabic language. That's what makes them Arab. They speak the Arabic language. This is my mother. Her name is Huda. And of course, like I said, her husband, my father, was killed in 1948 by a sniper. My father was not a soldier, but he, like many Palestinians, he was innocently shot and killed by an Israeli sniper, leaving my mother with 7 children. She was a committed Christian, and that made a lot of difference in our lives. So here we are, my brothers and sisters and my mother. If you are wondering where I am in this picture, look for a person with a black hair, and that will be me. Oh, well, all of us have black hair. So no, I'm right here. I'm this guy, the one on the left. Okay, and of course, here's my mother and my brothers and my sister. This guy here, this brother is called Bishara. He worked for MCC for 15 years. And he was the director of an MCC-run school in Beit Jala called Hope Secondary School. But before it became Hope Secondary School, it was called the Mennonite High School in Beit Jala. So the Mennonites came to Beit Jala near Bethlehem in about 1961, and they started that school to help Palestinians find a job. It was more or less like a business and commercial school. But my mother was a committed Christian. Her theme was, don't look back, always look forward. Don't ask why God, always ask how God. Never, she said, harbor any hate in your heart, always forgive. And so we grew up to appreciate her, to appreciate her faith, her Christian faith, and her dedication to peace and justice. So when she died, I wrote a book about her life. It's called Palestinian Memories, the story of a Palestinian mother and her people. Last year, one of my brothers, Bishara, who worked for MCC, wrote this book about his life, and he mentions mother a lot in his book. It's called Yet in the Dark Streets Shining. And so if you want to know more about Palestinians, about Palestinian Christians, about my mother and our family, you can read one of these books. Okay, now there are two invasions that are going on in this world today. One of them is the invasion of Palestine that has been going on for over 70 years, and one of them, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, if you look at the map on the left, this is Palestine before 1948. This is everything in the green is the Palestinian, and the white spots are what we call the Jewish settlements in Palestine before 1948. The next map is the 1947 UN partition of Palestine. And the next map is what happened between 1949 to 1967 after the first Arab-Israeli war. So you see the green areas are the Palestinian areas and the white areas are the Jewish or Israeli areas. And you can see how through history, the green areas are shrinking and the white areas are expanding. And this occupation is going on until today. Even today, the Israelis are continuing to seize Palestinian land and making it part of what we call Greater Israel. Okay, on the right, you see another invasion. This is the invasion, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And you can see the devastation of the country called Ukraine. I made this chart to compare the situation in Palestine with the situation in Ukraine. For example, here, this is about Palestine, here is about Ukraine. The invasion, it happened in 1948 and it is still ongoing. We have not had a day of peace in the Middle East since 1948, and the Israelis have never stopped confiscating Palestinian lands to make it part of Greater Israel. In Ukraine, it started like 2014 and it's still ongoing, the invasion. The land seized in Palestine in 1948, 78% of our country was taken over by the Israelis. In Ukraine, between 2014 to 2019, 7% of Ukrainian land was occupied by the Russians. Land seized also in 1967, the Israelis took the other 22% of Palestine. You add them together and now you have 100% of Palestinian land directly or indirectly occupied by the state of Israel. In Ukraine, as of today, about 22% of Ukrainian territory is occupied by the Russians. Number of refugees in 1948, 750,000 to 800,000 Palestinians became refugees. This is about 2/3 of the Palestinian population became refugees in 1948. In 1967, another 300,000. So you can see the number of Palestinian refugees by 1967 became over 1 million refugees. In Ukraine, 11 to 12 million refugees, and maybe that number is growing even as we speak. So 1/3 of the population of Ukraine has become refugees. The response of the Western countries to both invasions, when it comes to Palestine, minimal humanitarian support for the refugees. Very little, give us some food, give us some tents to live in, and so on. This is the Western humanitarian support for Palestinian refugees. Total political and military support for the Israeli invaders. Until today, it's the same, it didn't change. In the Ukraine, united and all-out Western support for both politically and economically and militarily for Ukraine. So, I mean, for almost all Palestinians, all Arabs, and for many people who are not even Palestinian Arabs, they see a double standard. They see a double standard. They see some kind of hypocrisy. And the question comes here, why did Western countries side with Israel and continue to side with Israel? Even though we are occupied and we are literally destroyed, and most of our people are in refugee camp, and they still pour money and weapons on Israel, and we are the victims of that invasion. Okay, here are the reasons. The first one, the reasons why the West continues to support Israel, the guilt of the Holocaust. Western countries are guilty for what happened to the Jewish people during the Holocaust, and they should, and it is tragic what happened to the Jewish people during the Holocaust, and Europe should, it is right for Europe to feel guilty and to do the right thing towards the Jewish people. The only problem for me as a Palestinian, why do I have also to pay such a high price for the Holocaust, since I did not participate as a Palestinian in the Holocaust. Number two, most Palestinians are Muslims. Had most Palestinians been Christians, it would have been a different story. The fact that Palestinians are Muslims, the Western world, which is mainly Christian in tradition, at least, they sided with Israel rather than siding with Palestinian Muslims. Number three, Palestinians are Arabs. While most early Jewish settlers come to Palestine from Western countries. So Jewish settlers, they speak Western languages, either German, French, Spanish, English, Russian, whatever, but Palestinians speak Arabic. And there's a certain kind of, I would say, racism in that. Number four, Christian Zionism. Many Christians in the West believe that God gave the Holy Land to the Jews, and thus, when they support the Jews, they believe they are helping fulfill biblical prophecies. In the US, Christian Zionists have vast voting power, and that's really spreading around the world now. And finally, geopolitical and economic reasons. Many politicians in the United States and in Canada, they support Israel for political and economic reasons rather than for ideological or religious reasons. So here are two pictures. On the left, you see the devastation of Palestinian neighborhood in Palestine. And on the right, you see the devastation of a neighborhood in Ukraine. It is atrocity here, and it is atrocity here. One of them, the Western countries are supporting the people who are doing it. They are supporting the invader. They are supporting the aggressor. And in the other one, the Western countries decided, no, we are going to defend Ukraine against the Russian aggression. And so Palestinians see a lot of hypocrisy in Western attitude towards Palestine and Ukraine. Now, let me go back with you a little bit to the history, and I will show some maps. This is the map of Palestine when I was born. I was born in 1946. So in 1946, this was Palestine under the British mandate. The British were controlling Palestine, and they were supposed to be the ones who are protecting Palestine. Palestine was like a protectorate for the British. So this was Palestine in 1918 to 1948 during the British mandate period. Now, in 1947, soon after the Holocaust, the United Nations partitioned Palestine, and you see the map on the left. The areas in the red were to be a Palestinian state, and the areas in the yellow were to become a Jewish state. And the area in the white, that includes Jerusalem, that was supposed to be under United Nations and not under Palestinian or under Jewish authority. Of course, for the Palestinians, that was a shock, that was a surprise. Why would we, the Palestinians, have to give half of our country to these new immigrants coming from Europe? But the Palestinians did not accept the UN partition, and a war started in 1948, and this is the result of the war. Israel now took everything in the yellow and also took everything in the dark red from the Palestinians, leaving the Palestinians with the Gaza Strip and with the West Bank. That's 1948, in the first Arab-Israeli Jewish war. So what was the situation then? Here it is. Palestinians in 1947 owned approximately 87.5% of Palestine, while Jews owned 6.6% of the total land mass. The remaining 5.9% was state land as classified under the British mandate. Well, you're looking at this and you can see that the Palestinians were not only the majority population of Palestine, they also owned most of the land. And this map shows it. You see the areas in the dark brown are the areas of the Jewish settlements in Palestine until 1948. So you can see, and all the rest of the area was Palestinian-owned land. So it's very, very big tragedy, and the Palestinians call it al-Nakba, which means the catastrophe. During the Nakba, all of these dots, they are Palestinian towns and villages that were either destroyed or depopulated by the Jewish militia. And the people who lived in these towns and villages were forced out. This was huge ethnic cleansing of Palestine. And the people ran to Lebanon, to Syria, to Jordan, to the West Bank, and to the Gaza Strip. This is where nearly 800,000 Palestinians became refugees. They thought they are going to running away from the war, but then after the war, they would cross the border back and come back to their country. But the Israelis fortified the new borders where any Palestinian man, woman, or child that tried to cross back to his or her home was shot and killed at the border. So the bulk of the Palestinians stayed in refugee camps that were started by the United Nations and the Red Cross. So most Palestinians ended up living in tents, nearly 1 million Palestinians. And it was really a devastation for the Palestinian people. Unfortunately, these people who ran away, their grandchildren are still living in refugee camp because the problems have not yet been solved. The UN made a resolution called UN Resolution 194. It says refugees, meaning Palestinian refugees, wishing to return to their homes and live at peace with their neighbors should be permitted to do so at the earliest practicable date, and those wishing not to return should be compensated for their property. So here you have an option for Palestinians, either compensation or repatriation. But unfortunately, none of them did happen. Israel refused to repatriate the Palestinians, and the world community did not want to compensate them. After 1948, okay, here you see the map. Before 1967, everything in the yellow now is the state of Israel. This is the Gaza Strip, and this is the West Bank. In 1967, we have another war called the Six-Day War. In the Six-Day War, Israel took the West Bank from Jordan, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, took the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip from Egypt, and occupied the Golan Heights from Syria. A big problem became bigger, and the number of refugees multiplied and doubled. Here is now the West Bank. Since 1967, Israelis, here is Israel, here is the West Bank, Israelis from Israel started pouring into the West Bank, building Jewish settlements around Palestinian towns and villages. And they will build their own roads. They'll take the water resources of the West Bank, use it on these settlements, and start choking the Palestinian population. Today, there are close to 800,000 Jewish settlers living in the West Bank. Now, if you look at the picture here on the right, you see what is happening. Everything in the red is now Israeli bypass roads and Israeli settlements in the West Bank. And you can see, if you are Palestinians, you are always surrounded by Jewish settlements and Jewish bypass roads in the West Bank. It's unimaginable cruelty and injustice that is happening to the Palestinian people. Well, we as Christians, including Mennonites, we care for peace, we care for justice. We are inspired by people like Martin Luther King, who said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." And that's what we Palestinians and peace lovers all over the world are hoping, that the moral arc of the universe will lead towards justice in Palestine. And it is slow. All right, another visionary, Barack Obama, said, "The arc of the moral universe may bend towards justice, but it doesn't bend on its own." This means it needs help. And we are the people who are the helpers. We are the people who work for peace and justice, will help the moral arc of the universe to bend towards justice. So here's the question, why Palestine? And why Mennonites around the world should be concerned about Palestine? Why should Christians around the world be concerned about Palestine? Why should even secular people be concerned about Palestine? So I'll give you some reasons why Palestine is important. First, the vanishing Christian presence. As I told you, I'm a Palestinian Christian. My family are Palestinian Christians. And we lived there in Palestine since the day of Pentecost. But now, most of my family, my brothers, my sisters, my nephews, my nieces, have migrated from Palestine, and now they live in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, in Europe, in Germany, but they are not living in Palestine. And so there is quite an erosion of Christian presence in the Holy Land. So if we as Christians worldwide care about our heritage, our Christian heritage in the Holy Land, then we should care about the Palestinian Christian presence. It would be sad when a day comes when the only Christian thing in the Holy Land will be shrines and churches and cathedrals, but no Christian people in the Holy Land. That will be a sad day. And I hope it would never come to that. But if things continue to be like that, that's where we are heading today. So the vanishing Christian presence. Number two, why Palestine, is the global impact. What happens in Palestine affects and influences people all over the world. Why? Because, you know, like Jerusalem is a city, and Bethlehem and many other places in the Holy Land. They are holy for Muslims, for Christians, and for Jews. So when there is a clash in Jerusalem and Jewish people are dying, or Christians are dying, or Muslims are dying on the streets of Jerusalem, and the blood is spilling on the streets of Jerusalem, that really influences more than the people of Palestine and Israel. It has echoes all over the world, in Jewish synagogues all over the world, in Muslim mosques all over the world, in Christian churches all over the world. People are concerned about what's happening in the Holy Land. So because of the global impact, it is so important to try to bring peace to the Holy Land. Another thing is what I call the disruption of interfaith dialogue. Because of the conflict in the Holy Land, it's very hard to get Jews, Muslims, and Christians together and have a good dialogue, a good interfaith dialogue, because sooner or later, the problem of Palestine will come up, and people have strong opinions one way or the other, and that could really disrupt the interfaith dialogue. And I wanted to disrupt the interfaith dialogue because there is no reason for Jews, Christians, and Muslims to come together, have parties together, dance together, eat, cakes and sweets together, but not address the issue of what's happening in Palestine. But it should disrupt us towards wanting to make peace between Jews, Muslims, and Christians. The other thing why Palestine is future wars, violence, and terrorism. Right now, the area there is anticipating a big war between Iran and Israel, with the involvement of Hezbollah in the north and Hamas in the south. So people are afraid. Israelis are afraid. Palestinians are afraid. And Syria and Lebanon and Jordan and all the Arab countries around are scared of what could happen in the next few months or the next few years. So unless you solve the Arab-Israeli conflict, there will always loom a threat of war and terrorism in the area. And we don't want to see that. I don't want to see a Jewish child get killed anywhere in Israel. And of course, I don't want to see a Palestinian child killed anywhere in the West Bank or in the Gaza Strip. But in order to do that, in order to see, calm, we need to work very hard for peace. The absence of peace is stealing life from little children, stealing their future, stealing their education, stealing their prospects for a job. If we have peace, Palestinians can live and can take care of themselves, and they don't need the United Nations to help them with food or with medicine. Palestinians are well educated. They can manage themselves if there is peace. And if there is peace for Palestinians, there will be peace for Israelis. If there is peace for Israelis and Palestinians, there will be peace for Jordanians and Iraqis and Egyptians and Lebanese and for Iran also. So we need to focus on Palestine, and we need to try to get our governments to work for peace for that part of the world. Okay, let me give you an example of what is happening. This is a map of Jerusalem. This is the old city right here in the brown. You see the Dome of the Rock. This is Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is a neighborhood of Jerusalem where I had my church. I was a pastor of a Baptist church here for about 20 years in a neighborhood called Sheikh Jarrah. And, you know, about a year ago, April 2021, Israeli settlers started coming to the Palestinian neighborhood and forcing people out of their homes to try to take over their homes. Of course, that outraged the residents of Sheikh Jarrah, and they started to fight back. And then their fight spread all the way to the Al-Aqsa Mosque here in Jerusalem. And from Al-Aqsa Mosque, it spread to Gaza. And Hamas in Gaza started launching rockets at Israel. But you can see the domino effect. You start with the violence against Palestinians in one place, the Palestinians react, then Hamas reacts, and you have a terrible situation. So the violence, you know, from Sheikh Jarrah right here, came all the way to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, where it was Ramadan, and Palestinians in the thousands were worshiping. And the Israelis started coming inside the mosque to disrupt the people in order to arrest some Palestinians. And clashes happened between Israelis and Palestinians, and many Palestinians were killed in the Al-Aqsa Mosque vicinity. That happens almost every now and then, because the Israelis would like to take this whole area and create the third Jewish temple in place of the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Of course, like I said, the violence spread to Gaza, and the Gazans start firing rockets at Israel, and Israel in return started bombarding Gaza, and it was horrible, and many people were killed in Gaza. Here is a Gaza woman walking by the ruins of a building in Gaza. Very sad situation, and it's been going on for too long, just for too long. And this is a whole neighborhood in Gaza that has been destroyed by Israeli bombardment. So what happened in spring 2021? Palestinians killed 230, Israelis killed 12, Palestinian children killed 68, Palestinian homes demolished 2,000, Palestinian homes damaged 15,000, Palestinians in Gaza made homeless 58,000. This is according to the United Nations report. So this is what happens when we don't have peace. And this is why peace is so important. So here you have an Israeli soldier attacking the Palestinian worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Since Ramadan 2022, this is recent, began in April 2, scores of Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces. So I wish I could say the story is finished, and now we can shake hands with the Israelis and we can proclaim peace. But no, I cannot say that. Sadly, tomorrow and after tomorrow, more Palestinians, and maybe few less, but some Israelis will also be killed. So why Palestine? Because the land confiscation continues. I already mentioned this, but you can see where Palestine used to be in 1948, 1947, 1967, and right now it is a tragedy that is going on even today. What did Jesus say? Blessed are the oppressors and the land grabbers? No, I would rather say Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. And we need to focus on Palestine and make peace in Palestine. One of the tragic situations is in Gaza. Gaza has been 15 years under an Israeli siege, is an Israeli blockade, almost like the Old Testament blockades of cities. And where nearly 2 million Palestinians are living in Gaza, but they are totally surrounded from the sea by Israeli gunboats and Israeli snipers. In the north, where you see the word Eretz, that's one passage to Gaza. It is most of the time blocked. And here, Israel blocking all of this eastern border, and Egypt blocks the southern border of Gaza that goes to the Sinai Peninsula from what we call Rafah, in the southern part of Gaza. So the people in Gaza are living really by charity. And if you take away the charity, 2 million people will starve in Gaza. It's a terrible situation, and it needs to end. We all need to ask the Israelis to end the blockade of Gaza. It's been going for too long and bringing a lot of misery to many people. And in the West Bank, you see the bulldozers going from March to August 2020, 389 Palestinian-owned structures were razed, means destroyed, in the West Bank, as the United Nations said. And this is Gaza in the aftermath of the 2014 bombing. You know, I took this picture. And as I went to Gaza with my friends, they will show me destroyed houses, destroyed buildings, and it was sad. I was working with the Shepherd Society, the humanitarian arm of Bethlehem Bible College, and it's just devastating to see how the Israelis mercilessly bombed Gaza. And when the Gazans, they decide to protest, even in a totally nonviolent protest like this, you don't see any knives, you don't see any guns, you don't see any machine guns or weapons. They go near the wall or the Israeli border between Israel and Gaza, and they just protest the blockade and the occupation. And they are always showered with Israeli bombs and Israeli poisonous gases. Here is a schoolboy from Gaza, and you see behind him the ruins of his neighborhood. The children are affected a lot. They are impacted a lot, and most of the kids in Gaza, face trauma and terrible feelings. Recently, the Israelis shot a Palestinian journalist. I knew the journalist very well because I heard her in person when I was one time visiting the Manger Square in Bethlehem, and I was celebrating Christmas in the Manger Square in Bethlehem. And then I heard Shireen giving the news about Christmas in Bethlehem. So I know her personally, but she was assassinated by an Israeli sniper. And that was really, really sad. Here is another picture of Shireen, and I call it the assassination of truth, because she was assassinated for telling truth about what's going on in Palestine. Worse than her assassination is what the Israelis done at her funeral. As the Palestinians were holding her coffin to take her to her burial place, the Israelis attacked the people who were carrying the coffin. And it was a tragedy to see that happening today. Now, what also is happening in Palestine in these days, if you want to help Palestinians, call on your congressman or member of your parliament or your political leaders to stop Israeli ethnic cleansing of Masafer Yatta. Masafer Yatta is a neighborhood near Hebron, and the Israelis are evicting over 1,000 Palestinians from their homes. They can do it because they have the power to do it. They do it because they don't recognize that the Palestinians are humans that deserve to live on their land. So they take the land from Palestinians and they give it to Jewish settlers. So this is happening right now. And that neighborhood is threatened until, you know, until there is a voice, until people around the world, and especially the church, raises its voice and say enough is enough. And we need not to support Israel when Israel is doing all of these atrocities. Now, one may ask, are Arabs serious about peace with the state of Israel? You know, my answer is yes. There is the Arab Peace Initiative, or sometimes we call it the Saudi Initiative of 2002. The initiative calls for normalizing relations between the Arab region and Israel in exchange for a full withdrawal by Israel from the occupied territories, including East Jerusalem, and a just settlement for the Palestinian refugee problem based on UN Resolution 194. What this means is that Arab countries, they all signed this Saudi Peace Initiative, saying we are willing to make peace with Israel if Israel will withdraw from the West Bank and including East Jerusalem. Well, the Israeli Prime Minister took this initiative, tore it to pieces, and threw it in the trash can. And that is sad, because until today, if you talk with Israelis, they'll say, we don't have a peace partners. The Arabs don't want to make peace with us. But this is not true. Most Arab people and most Arab leaders are anxious to make peace with Israel, but if this Israel will be fair, if this peace will be fair. Now, some people say, well, Hamas is sworn enemy of Israel, and the people in Hamas wants to destroy Israel. Yeah, as a Christian, I don't agree with Hamas. I don't agree with their platform and with their politics. But even Hamas leaders, they said they'll sign a peace agreement with Israel as long as the Palestinian people in the West Bank and in Gaza will accept that peace agreement. Not only this, Hamas offered Israel a 10-year truce, we call it Hudna in Arabic, and Israel rejected that offer. So if you think that Hamas is not willing or ready for peace, you are really wrong. This is Hamas's position on engagement in peace talks. Hamas leaders do not trust Israelis and would not sit with Israelis to negotiate a plan to end the conflict. However, Hamas leaders affirmed on several occasions that they would accept the results of peace negotiations with Israel. That's negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, if a majority of the Palestinian people accept the terms of the results of the negotiation. What this means, if there is peace with Israel between the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah under Mahmoud Abbas and Israel, Hamas will accept it if the majority of the Palestinians would accept it. And the world needs to know that because Hamas is depicted in the Western media only as a terrorist organization that is sworn to destroy the state of Israel. So the Israeli dilemma. Here is the Israeli dilemma. Most Israelis are against the one-state solution. Most Israeli leaders are against a two-state solution. So they don't want one-state solution. They don't want two-state solution. What do they want? This is an Israeli dilemma, a Palestinian nightmare, and a challenge to peacemakers. The Israelis need to decide what do they want and pursue it in order for them and us Palestinians to live peace in that piece of land. Here is another reason why the Israelis are really nervous. Half of the people who live in Israel, Palestine, who live between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, are Palestinians. And because of the Palestinian higher birth rate, it's becoming more Palestinian people living between the river and the Mediterranean Sea than Israeli Jews. And that really brings nightmare to some Israelis. But this means there is no way to solve the situation except for Palestinians and Israelis to decide to live together in peace on that piece of land without one side decided to boss the other and to dictate on the other what to do. So what should be our Christian response to all of this? And here it is: stand with Israeli and Palestinian peacemakers and those who support them in your church and community. Let us help Israeli peacemakers. They are speaking out. Let's help them. Let's help Palestinian peacemakers. And let us educate our church about both Palestinians and Israeli peacemakers. Our Christian response: be prophetic, tell the truth in teaching, writing, and when preaching. Speak to authorities, challenge your church to stand with justice. Organize in-person or virtual gatherings like this gathering to shed light on what is happening in Israel-Palestine. I'm a member of a group of people called PCAP, means Palestinian Christian Advocates for Peace. And, you know, our members, at least in the United States and Canada, are willing to go to any church to try to help people understand the situation. Finally, I would say, read the Kairos Palestine document. There is a document called Kairos Palestine. This is a call from the Christian community in the Holy Land, from the churches in the Holy Land, inviting the world to come and see our situation and respond to it in a Christian manner. The Kairos Palestine document, you can read it online. Our church, our Christian response: seek a just peace and coexistence for both Israelis and Palestinians, and condemn violence regardless who perpetrates it. You know, just to keep hammering on Hamas, or Hezbollah, or Iran, they are the ugly guys, the violent people. And you see the Israelis doing the violence and you keep your mouth shut totally and never talk about Israeli violence against Palestinians. That is not fair. Condemn violence regardless who perpetrates it. Familiarize yourself with Christian Zionism and equip yourself with a biblical alternative to Christian Zionism. If you want to know more about this, go to www.christianzionism.org. www.christianzionism.org. You can read about Christian Zionism in both English and Spanish. So what is Christian Zionism? Here is a definition. Christian Zionism refers to Christians who support the creation and the sustenance of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, and all that implies out of the belief that a Jewish state in Palestine speeds up the fulfillment of prophecy, means the second coming of Jesus Christ. I'll repeat that for the translators. Christian Zionism refers to Christians who support the creation and the sustenance of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, and all that implies out of the belief that a Jewish state in Palestine speeds up the fulfillment of prophecy. As a Palestinian Christian dealing with theology, you know, we have to deal with Christian Zionism. And I came up with this chart to help me how to deal with Christian Zionism. If you look at the top of the chart, you see the nation, the land, the city, the temple, the priesthood, the sacrifice. These are important things, both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Now, if you look at the middle line, you see how these things are interpreted in the Old Testament. The nation, Israel; the land, Promised Land; the city, Jerusalem; the temple, Temple Mount on Mount Zion or Mount Moriah; depending on your geography of the Holy Land. Priesthood, Levitical priesthood, sacrifice, animal sacrifice. Now, when we come to the bottom line, okay, you can see here the nation becomes all believers. The land becomes the kingdom of God. The city becomes a new Jerusalem, a spiritual entity. The temple, as we are learned in the New Testament, it's the heart of the believers. Paul said to the people in the Corinthian church, you are the temple of the Holy Spirit and God's Spirit lives in you. The priesthood, Christ became our high priest, and the sacrifice, also Christ became our sacrifice when he died on the cross for us. So what does this mean? This means, you know, now God works with all people, including the Jewish people. I'm not preaching what you would call replacement theology. I don't believe God's curse and condemnation are on the Jewish people. No, the Jewish people are still loved by God. So I talk here about all believers. The kingdom of God is for everybody, for both Jews and Gentiles. The same, all of these blessings are common to both Jews and Gentiles. But the most important thing about this that we need to learn is that in the new covenant, it's no more racial selection, chosen people. We are all chosen. And it's no more territorial, one piece of land. The whole world is God's holy land. This is how I interpret the New Testament. I do have this chart, and I'll be willing to send it to anybody who requests it, with all the verses in the scripture in it. Okay, I will end this part with signs of hope. So am I hopeful? You know, as a Christian, I have to always be hopeful because I believe in God. I believe in Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace. Many young people in the United States are getting their news from the electronic media and are more eager for peace than a blind support for the state of Israel. Another sign of hope, many Israelis and Jews are fed up with the policies of the Israeli government, and some are becoming the strongest advocates of Palestinian rights. Another sign of hope, most Palestinians, including their president, Mahmoud Abbas, have committed to nonviolent methods to resist the illegal occupation of their land. So Palestinians are leaning towards nonviolence. Yes, there is Hamas. Hamas doesn't believe in nonviolence, but the majority of the Palestinians still believe in nonviolence as the way out. Churches in the United States, including some evangelical churches, are increasingly focusing on issues of justice rather than their historic interpretations of biblical prophecies when dealing with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So many evangelical Christians are taking a different look. We started in Bethlehem a seminar called Christ at the Checkpoint. And evangelicals and non-evangelicals have been coming from all over the world to our conference to deal with these issues. And many evangelicals are now changing their mind about these issues. Several Israelis and international human rights organizations are openly declaring and documenting that Israel is an apartheid state. I hate to say that loudly, but this is the reality. If you visit Israel today and you go to the West Bank and you go to the Gaza Strip and you see what the Israelis doing, you'll come up with the same conclusion like these international human rights organizations, that Israel is an apartheid state. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, and Israeli human rights organizations, all three organizations have recently declared that Israel is an apartheid state, and not only made a declaration, they have documents, hundreds of pages documenting Israeli human rights violation. So the church needs to wake up, and the church needs to say the truth about what's happening in Israel and in Palestine. I end up this with this verse from the scripture. Justice and only justice you shall follow, that you may live and inherit the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Our desire as God's people is to see justice for everybody that is living in the Holy Land, for all Israelis, all Palestinians, all Jews, all Muslims, all Christians who live in that country. We want peace for all, and we need to work hard to do that. Thank you, and I'm now willing for questions, to answer any question that anyone may have.
Thank you, Alex. I didn't see any questions in the chat. We have one now, so that says, I'll read it for everyone and then it can get interpreted as well. It says, thank you, Mr. Awad, so very much for your informative and poignant presentation. I have several questions. I will post them and please decide which to answer. Okay. While he is posting them, we can give the interpreters a moment to breathe. But you were also offering, Alex, you're offering your chart with the different covenants. Where is a good place to go to get that? How can we find that?
You can go to alexeawad@yahoo.com. alexeawad@yahoo.com, and that sends me an email, and I'll be very happy to send you the a digital form of this chart.
Okay, now there's several questions. I think he said you can decide which to answer, and I can always go back and read these questions again. But there's several questions here now. A question, what countries have received Palestinian refugees after 1947? Another question, are there particular Christian denominations that tend to be associated with Christian Zionism? Another question, it seems to me what you have described for the acts of Israel against Palestinians sounds less like apartheid and more like ethnic cleansing. So with respect to Ukraine, I've heard it suggested that Russia is attempting to commit genocide against the Ukrainian population. But I do not hear these two terms being used to describe the situation for Palestinians by the Western press, so why not? Also, have the efforts in the US for divestment and boycott of Israel had any effect whatsoever? There are a lot of questions, but they're all very related to what you've been speaking. Sometimes I see a Jewish synagogue with a sign in front, "We stand with Israel." What can I say to a member of such a congregation? End. So there you have in the chat several directions. Yeah.
Linda, could you give me one by one, because I did not write them down? Please
No.
just give me the first question.
If you go into the chat, you can see them as well.
Okay, I'll go to the chat.
Yeah.
All right.
The first question about being what countries have received Palestinian refugees after 1947 is where he started.
Okay, the countries that receive Palestinian refugees and where there are now refugee camps are Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. But because of the closeness of Lebanon, most of the Palestinians who lived in the Galilee area had to run to Lebanon. Most of the Palestinians who lived in the middle, like around Nablus and Jenin, they went to the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. Really, the Jordanians took about 500,000 refugees in 1948. The ones who live in the south, they went to the Gaza Strip, and a few of them went to Egypt. But that's why 70% of the population of Gaza are Palestinian refugees of 1948 or 1967 wars. So I mean, sometimes the Arab countries are blamed for not accepting refugees, but this is totally against reality. The obvious reality is that Jordan, Lebanon, Syria accepted hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees when these countries were themselves poor and they can hardly feed their own people, but they still accepted Palestinian refugees. So it's not fair to blame Arab countries for not accepting refugees. Okay, the second question. Can you say it to me, because I don't. Okay, Jan, let me see.
Are there particular Christian denominations tend to be associated with Christian Zionism? Where do you find Christian Zionism most?
Well, Christian Zionism is found in most denominations. I have itinerated in Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist, Mennonite, Quaker churches all over the United States and Canada, and I found Christian Zionism in all of them. However, the real Christian Zionist churches, they don't even invite me. All right, they are like, mainly Pentecostal and charismatic churches, where Christian Zionism has become like a heresy within these churches. They almost worship the Jewish people and the state of Israel. These people would think of me as anathema. They will not accept me or accept my message. But I served with the United Methodist Church, and I was in the United Methodist Church in Alabama. And when I start speaking, some people start coming out of the church because they could not accept what I was saying because of their pro-Jewish or pro-Israeli stand. I spoke in Florida, on the west coast of Florida, near Miami, Florida, and the pastor herself was a Christian Zionist, and she gave me the hardest time because I was the guest speaker. She thought, because I'm an evangelical, I have a really beautiful message about biblical prophecy and the return of Jesus Christ, and she was disappointed because I was talking about human rights and the Palestinian issues, and she was really upset. But and I've been to Mennonite churches in Canada that were very Christian Zionistic, and that's why the Mennonites hired me for 1 year to go to Mennonite churches in Canada and the United States to help raise awareness. But it did influence the Mennonites, where when they came to Orlando, Florida and voted, they voted overwhelmingly in support of Palestinians.
I think you were also talking to me about some international visits you have made. So what have you found internationally outside of the US and Canada?
Unfortunately, Christian Zionists have the great powers outside the United States. I go around, Africa and preach in Africa and other parts in Latin America. Christian Zionism is a disease that spreads so strongly in these places. I went to Mali. Most of the pastors were offered scholarships to go to Jerusalem to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacle, which is run by Christian Zionists. And when they come back, they are saturated with the Christian Zionist agenda. In Brazil, I went to a church, and when I went to the church, I saw stars of David and flags of the state of Israel all over the church. And I was the guest speaker. And when I said, what is this? What's going on? Well, they said, we are, we believe it. The Jews are God's chosen people, and we are celebrating Israel. I was ready to leave when the man who invited me, he said, please don't leave, just teach us. And I stayed and I taught them. But they were so much, in depth with Christian Zionism. in Latin America and Brazil.
Another question here. It seems to me that what you've described for the acts of Israel against Palestinians is less like apartheid and more like ethnic cleansing. So with respect to Ukraine, I've heard it suggested that Russia is attempting to commit genocide against the Ukrainian population, but I don't hear these two terms, genocide and ethnic cleansing, being used to describe the situation for Palestinians by the Western press. Why not?
Well, it is all. It is every one of them. It is ethnic cleansing, it is genocide, it is apartheid, and it is the problem of the Western media that they are selective in what they share about the state of Israel. If a Palestinian or an Arab commits an act of terrorism, it is all over the Western media with all the details, and they bring the Jewish victims and they cry over them and so on. But when Israeli radicals kill Palestinians in big numbers, the Western media is very silent, very, very, very silent. And therefore, the problem is a media problem for us. Yeah. But in Palestine, we have ethnic cleansing. Yes, we have genocide. And one time I was on a TV program and I said, I was in Jerusalem. I was still serving in Jerusalem. And I said, there is a genocide, and all the Israeli media was after me. They did not like for me to use the word genocide. But, here in Oregon, we say, if it quacks like a duck, and if it eats like a duck, and if it flies like a duck, then it's a duck. And if Israel is doing all of these things, we need to call it by its name. When the Israelis are taking Palestinian land by force, killing Palestinians, destroying their homes, having rules, that are pro-Israeli and against Palestinians all the time, racist rules, then this is an apartheid state, and we need to call it as it is. Linda, you are silent.
Yeah, now let me try to make noise. A question about the efforts of the U.S. for divestment and boycott of Israel. So have they had any effect whatsoever? Your thoughts on?
I think the BDS is very, very important. So far, it have not yet accomplished its goal. And of course, the goal of BDS is to get the Israelis to change their mind and to come to real, genuine peace with the Palestinian people. And that did not happen. However, you have to continue with the BDS movement until it brings results. The nice thing about the BDS movement, it is totally nonviolent. We are not wanting to kill Israelis. We don't want to spill blood. We don't want to be aggressive against the occupier. We just want the occupier to realize what they are doing is wrong. And we are hoping that what happened in South Africa will also happen to Palestine, where the Israelis will wake up and realize that the occupation does not pay, and they need to stop it.
And then one more question. Sometimes I see a Jewish synagogue with a sign in front, "We stand with Israel." What can I say to a member of such a congregation?
Well, we tell them, let us stand. God's people need to take a stand, but they need to stand with justice. They need to stand with truth. Actually, standing with Israel when Israel is doing so much atrocities is really hurting Israel in the long run. It's not helping Israel. Gideon Levy, an Israeli journalist, said, when we stand with Israel and support Israel, when Israel is doing so much wrong, it's like taking an alcoholic person and giving him an extra bottle, another bottle to drink. It does not help him or Herr at all. So if we really love Israel, we call on Israel to make peace with her neighbors. And believe me, Israeli neighbors, whether they are Muslims or Christians, are ready for peace. 74 peace of conflict is too much for any people. We've been suffering for the last 74 years. We are anxious to have peace with the state of Israel. But the Israelis who have the power to make peace are reluctant to make peace because they are eager to take as much Palestinian land as they could before they sign a peace agreement.
We have a comment, and then I see it is followed up with a question. Comes from Germany. He says, for us Germans, it's very difficult to stand with Palestinians and demand justice. So what is your counsel to us, the grandchildren of the Nazis?
I have a sister. She's married to a German person, and they live near Augsburg, Germany. And we discuss this issue very much. And my sister tells me about, how the German government today tries to quench every effort of Palestinians to tell their story in Germany. And if the Palestinians want to demonstrate some atrocities the Israelis are doing, the German government does not allow that. I can understand to a certain extent why Germany is very sensitive to this issue, but I would say to my German brother-in-law and any German friend, don't make two mistakes. The Holocaust is a tragic mistake. It's a black spot in German history, but also allowing Israel to do everything that Israel is doing, it's another mistake. And two mistakes don't make a right. So the German people need to realize that to help Israel, they need to lead Israel to do justice to the Palestinians.
I skipped over the invitation to Zambia. I want to make sure that you see that you're invited to come to Zambia, Africa. It's not a question, it's a statement. And also, the website, I see that we've also provided now, or Alex has, and we've put in the chat, the email, so you can find Alex to follow up with that. So,
I would welcome the invitation to Zambia if it includes some nice, delicious meals.
we all have our priorities. Are there any other questions? We have a few minutes yet.
Well, my final statement is an address to Mennonite leaders. Mennonite leaders need to get together and declare Israel as an apartheid state. I know this is a challenge for Mennonite leaders, but I think they need to do it. Now, if some Mennonite leaders are not sure that Israel is an apartheid state, I urge them to make a quick trip to the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, see the situation, then come back and declare openly to the world that the Mennonite Church believes that Israel is an apartheid state. Because if the churches raise up their voice, it's not because we want Israel to look bad. That's not the goal. The goal is that the Israelis need to think that the world is discovering what they are doing and that it cannot last. Being an apartheid state will not last. So the Israelis need to come to open their eyes and see what they are doing and realize that today they cannot continue like this.
Thank you for that call for justice and to speak about the experience of the people in the land. And to remember, in front of it all, you've told us, you've reminded us that this isn't peace for one. You can't have peace for one people or the other. You can't choose one side if you're working for peace. You have to create peace for both sides. And that's the aim of a call for God's vision of justice. So thank you so much. Are there any other? I think that is a good closing word. I will simply remind us all to pray for peace, to work for peace. Thank you for the presentation and a call to justice and peace for Palestinians, Israelis, and the world. That's a good note to end on. So yeah, thank you all for joining us. Thank you to the interpreters who worked very hard this past nearly an hour and a half. And to all who joined us. Thank you, Alex, for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to share my heart. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you.